What if the monsters we read about in myths, the creatures that haunted the nightmares of our ancestors, were not gods or demons, but simply men? What if the tales of beasts that stalked the night were not allegories, but faded memories of a terror that was chillingly human? Imagine the city of Rome, the heart of the world, a beacon of law and power in the 1st century. A city of 1 million souls where life is cheap and death is a public spectacle. Yet, in this metropolis accustomed to bloodshed, a new kind of fear begins to fester. It is not the clean death of a gladiator's sword in the Colosseum, nor the state-sanctioned cruelty of a crucifixion. It is a furtive, anonymous horror that crawls through the sprawling, labyrinthine alleys of the Esquiline Hill. A body is found at dawn, discarded amidst the refuse and the tombs of the poor. Then another, and another. There is no clear motive. The victims are not wealthy nobles robbed for their coin, nor are they political rivals silenced with a dagger. They are the city's invisible people, prostitutes, beggars, travelers who took a wrong turn in the dark. The pattern is the only thing that connects them, a savage, repetitive violence that seems to serve no purpose but its own grim satisfaction. The vigiles, Rome's rudimentary police and firefighters, are powerless. They are equipped to handle riots and douse flames, not to hunt a phantom who leaves no witnesses. Could you suspect a monster in someone you considered a hero? In a society that deified its emperors and celebrated its conquerors, the idea of a man killing for pleasure without reason was an alien concept. Such madness had to be supernatural. Whispers spread like a plague through the tenement blocks and filthy taverns. It is a curse, some say, sent by a slighted god. Others blame a lemur, a wrathful spirit of the dead, clawing its way back into the world of the living. The official explanation is far more mundane, yet just as terrifying in its implications. It is the work of a single mortal man. This is a psychological paradox that the Roman mind could barely grasp. They understood greed, they understood ambition, they understood vengeance. They did not understand the predator who hunts not for food or territory, but for the sheer ecstasy of the kill. This anonymous killer, this shadow on the Esquiline Hill, represents a fundamental breakdown of the Roman order. The Pax Romana, the Roman peace, was supposed to protect its citizens from chaos, but how can you protect them from a monster who wears a human face, who might be your neighbor, the baker you buy bread from, the man who nods to you in the forum? The fear he sows is more corrosive than any invading army. Empires are built on the bones of soldiers, but they collapse from the fear of a single man in the shadows. This terror exposes the fragility of civilization itself. The authorities, desperate to quell the rising panic, need a culprit. They cannot admit that a lone madman is outwitting them, that the greatest city on earth can be held hostage by one individual's depravity, so they turn to familiar scapegoats, foreign cults operating on the city's fringes, practitioners of forbidden magic. Yet the killings continue, methodical and relentless. The monster's methods are brutal, but there is a chilling intelligence to them. He chooses his hunting grounds well, the Subura, a chaotic district of twisting lanes and towering, precarious apartment buildings where a scream can be easily mistaken for a drunken brawl. He strikes at night, under the cloak of a city with no street lighting, where the darkness is absolute. He understands the city's rhythms, its vulnerabilities. He is a product of this urban jungle, its first and perhaps most perfect predator. This is not just crime, it is a violation of the cosmic order. In a world governed by gods and fates, motiveless evil is a terrifying anomaly. It suggests that the universe is not orderly but chaotic and indifferent, that a man can become a monster without any divine intervention at all. This thought is more frightening to the Roman citizen than any barbarian at the gates. The Esquiline killer was never caught. His name is lost to history, his story surviving only in fragmented accounts and the lingering sense of dread he imprinted on the city's consciousness. He is a ghost, a proto-serial killer whose existence forced a hyper-rational society to confront the irrational. But he was not the only type of monster lurking in Rome's shadows. There was another kind, one that operated not in the squalid alleys but in the opulent villas of the elite. These killers were quieter, more insidious. They did not use a knife in the dark, but a drop of poison in a cup of wine. They were the city's poisoner women, a shadowy network that offered a discreet solution to unwanted husbands, troublesome rivals, or inconvenient heirs. Their actions were not driven by bloodlust, but by a cold, calculated pragmatism. Yet, in their methodical work, culling the population one victim at a time, we see the unnerving profile of another kind of serial murderer, the angel of death, who kills not with rage, but with a chilling, godlike sense of control. Their crimes were whispered about, but rarely proven. How could you prove murder when the victim simply grew ill and wasted away? The Roman world was a crucible of extremes: unimaginable wealth and abject poverty, stoic philosophy and hysterical superstition, brutal law and absolute lawlessness. It was the perfect ecosystem for the human predator to thrive. A life was easily extinguished and just as easily forgotten. The constant influx of slaves, migrants, and travelers meant that people disappeared all the time. No one kept careful records of the lower classes. A person could vanish without a trace, their absence noted by no one. This anonymity was the killer's greatest weapon. He could move through the crowds invisible, his dark intentions hidden behind a mask of normalcy. What is scarier? A monster that hides in the dark, or one that smiles at you in broad daylight? The Roman monster could be either. He was the savage who butchered his victims on the Esquiline, and he was the respectable matron who served her husband his final, fatal meal. The city was their hunting ground, and its citizens their unsuspecting prey. The sheer scale of Rome, its density and its indifference, provided a perfect camouflage. In a city of 1,000,000 faces, a monster's is just one among the many. The fear of these unseen assassins became so pervasive that it warped the political landscape. Accusations of poisoning became a common tool to eliminate rivals. A sudden death in a noble house was rarely attributed to natural causes. It was always poison. This paranoia created a demand for specialists, for those who understood the subtle arts of toxicology. The authorities, in their frantic search for the alleyway butcher, also conducted purges of those suspected of possessing this secret, deadly knowledge. They sought scapegoats among herbalists and so-called witches, anyone who dealt in the hidden properties of plants and minerals. The city was hunting for its monsters, both the ones who killed with savage force and those who killed with silent grace. They rounded up hundreds, executing them in the arena to appease the terrified populace. But these public displays of justice did little to solve the underlying problem. They were merely treating the symptoms, not the disease. The disease was a darkness within the human heart that no law or execution could eradicate. This obsession with poison, this terror of the unseen death, would eventually elevate one woman from obscurity to a position of terrifying power. The state, in its quest to control the art of killing, would end up creating its most accomplished artist. The fear of the unknown killer forced the authorities to seek scapegoats among those who possessed secret knowledge, such as the formulation and application of poisons. But what happens when the state decides not to eradicate this knowledge, but to weaponize it? What happens when the hunter of poisoners becomes their chief employer? The search for control over the art of silent death led the Roman elite not to a clandestine criminal, but to an artisan of assassination, a woman whose name would become synonymous with betrayal and scientifically crafted murder. A woman who would not hide in the shadows of the Esquiline, but would practice her craft in the glittering, blood-soaked corridors of the imperial palace itself. Her name was Locusta. She was not just a killer, she was an instrument of state power, a living testament to the idea that in the right hands poison was not a weapon of chaos, but of exquisite, terrifying order. She represents the chilling evolution from the lone, compulsive predator to the state-sanctioned serial killer, a professional whose work was not a symptom of madness, but a tool of politics. She was the dark secret at the heart of the empire, the woman who held the lives of emperors in the palm of her hand. What's more terrifying, the brutal, open violence of the arena, or the silent, unseen killer in your own neighborhood? The fear of a known enemy is a simple thing, but the dread of a hidden one can poison the soul of an entire city. Let us know what you think is the ultimate horror. Do you vote for the spectacle of public death or the chilling mystery of a secret shadow? Your choice reveals what civilization truly fears. When power needs a quiet solution, it does not summon a legionary with a sword. It whispers the name of a poisoner. Locusta of Gaul was not born into the Roman aristocracy. She was an outsider, a provincial woman with a dangerous and specialized knowledge of botany and its lethal applications. In any other era, she might have been a village healer or a feared witch. But in the paranoid, decadent world of Julio-Claudian Rome, her unique talents were in high demand. She was arrested for poisoning, her fate seemingly sealed. She was destined for the executioner, but her reputation preceded her. Empress Agrippina the Younger, wife of the reigning Emperor Claudius, saw not a common criminal but a rare and valuable resource. She arranged for Locusta's release, transferring her from a prison cell to a gilded cage within the imperial court. Her new role, to serve the empress's ambitions. Locusta became the secret weapon in a dynasty defined by paranoia and bloodshed. She was a scientist in an age of superstition, her laboratory a place where the art of murder was refined into a brutal, efficient science. She experimented on slaves, meticulously observing the effects of various toxins, calibrating dosages, and studying reaction times. For her, people were not human beings, they were test subjects, variables in a deadly equation. Her first great commission came in the year 54 Anno Domini. Agrippina, impatient for her own son, Nero, to ascend to the throne, tasked Locusta with eliminating the one obstacle in her path, Emperor Claudius himself. The challenge was immense. The emperor was famously paranoid, surrounded by food tasters who sampled every dish before it reached his lips. A simple poison would be instantly detected. Locusta needed a masterpiece of subtlety. She concocted a poison derived from mushrooms, one that would mimic the symptoms of indigestion, a common ailment for the gluttonous Claudius. The poison was applied to a single, choice mushroom on the emperor's plate, a delicacy he was known to favor. The plan worked to perfection. Claudius fell ill, and as his condition worsened, Agrippina's own physician, a co-conspirator, stepped in. Under the guise of inducing vomiting to clear the emperor's system, he used a feather dipped in a second, fast-acting poison to touch the back of Claudius's throat. The emperor died within hours. Nero was proclaimed emperor, and Locusta, the peasant woman from Gaul, had successfully assassinated the most powerful man in the world. She had proven that the deadliest weapon is not the sword, but the secret whispered over a cup of wine. Under Nero's rule, Locusta's status grew. She was no longer just a secret tool, but a valued tutor. The young emperor, pathologically insecure and ruthless, wanted to master her art. He became her student, and she taught him the dark alchemy of death. Together, they refined their craft. Her next great challenge was the elimination of Britannicus, Claudius's biological son and Nero's stepbrother, a clear rival to the throne. The first attempt, a poison administered in his drink, failed. It was too weak, only causing the boy to have diarrhea. Nero, in a rage, personally beat Locusta, accusing her of incompetence or betrayal. Terrified for her life, Locusta promised a poison that would kill as swiftly as a dagger's strike. In the emperor's own chambers, she brewed a new, highly concentrated concoction, testing it on a pig, then a slave, until she was certain of its efficacy. The plan for the second attempt was diabolical in its ingenuity. At a family banquet, Britannicus was served a cup of wine that was deliberately too hot. When he asked for it to be cooled with water, the water that was added contained the colorless, odorless poison. The boy drank, convulsed, and died within minutes, right at the dinner table. Nero coolly explained to the horrified guests that his stepbrother was merely having an epileptic seizure, a condition from which he supposedly suffered. Locusta was now indispensable. Nero rewarded her with a full pardon for her past crimes, vast estates, and even sent her pupils to learn her trade. She had become, in effect, the official state poisoner, a minister of a secret and deadly branch of government. She operated with impunity, her services available to the emperor whenever he wished to remove a wealthy senator or a dissenting general without the messiness of a public trial. She transformed murder from a crime of passion into a sterile administrative procedure. Her career represents a chilling nexus of science, power, and a complete absence of empathy. She was not a psychopath in the modern sense, driven by rage or compulsion. She was a cold, detached professional, a technician of death who took pride in her work. The people she killed were not victims to her. They were problems to be solved, biological systems to be expertly shut down. Her lack of emotion was perhaps her most terrifying quality. She was a monster who did not foam at the mouth, but one who took meticulous notes and measured her ingredients with scientific precision. But the fortunes of those who serve tyrants are always tied to their masters. Nero's reign descended into madness and chaos. His extravagance and cruelty turned the Senate and the army against him. In the year 68 Anno Domini, as rebellions spread across the empire, Nero was declared a public enemy by the Senate. His downfall was swift and pathetic. In his final hours, he called for Locusta to provide him with a poison for his own suicide, but she was nowhere to be found. The great artist of death was not there to grant him a quick and painless exit. Nero was forced to take his own life with a dagger, a clumsy and bloody end for a man who had orchestrated so many sophisticated departures. With Nero's death, Locusta's protection vanished. The new emperor, Galba, had no use for such a notorious symbol of the previous regime's corruption. She was arrested, dragged through the streets of Rome in chains, and publicly executed. Her death was reportedly a gruesome spectacle, designed to satisfy the public's thirst for vengeance against the horrors of Nero's rule. Some accounts claim she was raped by a specially trained giraffe before being torn apart by wild animals in the arena, a brutal end for a woman whose life's work had been the pursuit of a clean, quiet kill. Locusta's story is more than a tale of a single criminal. It is a parable about the nature of power. It shows how easily the tools of the state can be turned to monstrous ends and how civilization's veneer of law and order can conceal a machinery of systematic murder. She was an anomaly, a woman who achieved immense influence in a patriarchal world through a forbidden and feared skill. She was a creature of the Roman court, a perfect product of its ambition, luxury, and moral decay. Her legacy is a chilling reminder that the most dangerous serial killers are not always the ones who lurk in the alleys. Sometimes they are the ones who stand right next to the throne, their hands stained not with blood, but with the invisible taint of poison. Her sophisticated, calculated evil stands in stark contrast to the chaotic savagery of the Esquiline killer. But both were products of their time, two faces of the same darkness that resides in the human soul. The fall of Rome did not extinguish this darkness, it merely allowed it to lie dormant, waiting for a new age, a new kind of society, to give it a new form. The Roman Empire crumbled, its intricate system of laws and legions replaced by a fractured world of faith and feudalism. The sophisticated evil of the imperial court gave way to a different kind of darkness, one rooted not in political ambition, but in spiritual despair and psychological collapse. For centuries, the monsters were believed to be supernatural, demons, devils, and foul spirits that plagued mankind. But the Middle Ages would produce a monster more terrifying than any mythical beast because he was entirely real. He was not an outsider or peasant driven mad by poverty. He was a nobleman of the highest rank, a celebrated war hero, a marshal of France, a man who had stood beside a saint. This hero's journey into the abyss would become one of history's most shocking and cautionary tales, a story of how the brightest saint can cast the darkest shadow. From the decadent palaces of Rome, the trail of terror leads us to the grim, fortified castles of 15th century France, and to a man whose name would become forever linked with unspeakable evil, Gilles de Rais. History remembers its heroes. It carves their names in stone and sings of their deeds in epic poems. But what happens when the hero is also the monster? What happens when the man celebrated for saving a nation is secretly a predator who preys on its children? This is the story of Gilles de Rais, a companion in arms of Joan of Arc, a marshal of France, and one of the most prolific serial killers in recorded history. Born in 1404 into one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in Brittany, Gilles was destined for greatness. He was intelligent, courageous, and a brilliant military strategist. By his early 20s, he had amassed a vast fortune and a fearsome reputation on the battlefield. When a young peasant girl named Joan of Arc emerged, claiming divine guidance to drive the English out of France, Gilles de Rais was one of her most ardent and loyal supporters. He fought by her side at the legendary Siege of Orléans, his valor earning him the highest military rank in the kingdom, Marshal of France. He stood next to Charles VII at his coronation, a national hero at the pinnacle of his glory. But a profound darkness was growing within this celebrated warrior. The capture and execution of Joan of Arc in 1431 seemed to shatter something inside him. He retired from military life, retreating to his vast collection of castles, most notably the forbidding fortress of Tiffauges. It was here, behind stone walls and away from the public eye, that the hero's mask began to crumble, revealing the monster beneath. Gilles squandered his fortune on a lavish and theatrical lifestyle, staging extravagant plays and surrounding himself with a retinue of alchemists, sorcerers, and unsavory companions. He became obsessed with the occult, desperately seeking the philosopher's stone to turn base metals into gold and reclaim his wealth. His spiritual quest, however, soon twisted into something far more sinister. He sought a pact with the devil, believing that only a powerful demon could grant him the knowledge and riches he craved. The rituals, his sorcerers told him, required offerings of the purest and most innocent kind. They required the hearts, hands, and eyes of children. And so it began. A shadow fell over the lands surrounding Gilles de Rais' castles. Children started to disappear. At first, they were the children of peasants who worked on his estates, their vanishing explained away as accidents or runaways. But the numbers grew. Dozens, then scores of children, mostly young boys, vanished without a trace. They were lured to his castles with promises of food or employment, then ushered into the dungeons from which they would never emerge. Inside those soundproofed chambers, Gilles de Rais and his closest servants enacted horrors that defy description. For years, he lived a chilling double life. By day, he was the cultured lord, a patron of the arts, a pious man who attended Mass daily. By night, he descended into a private hell of his own making, a world of sadistic torture, ritualistic murder, and necrophilia. The hero of France had become a predator, his castles transformed into factories of death. His motivations remain a subject of debate for historians and psychologists. Was it post-traumatic stress from the brutality of war? Was it a spiritual crisis following the death of Joan? Or was he simply a psychopath whose immense wealth and power allowed him to indulge his darkest impulses without restraint? The whispers among the peasantry grew into a roar of anguish and suspicion. Parents who had lost their children began to point their fingers at the powerful lord in the castle. For years, nothing was done. Gilles de Rais was too powerful, too well connected, a hero of the realm. Who would dare accuse him? The turning point came not from an investigation into the murders, but from a foolish political dispute. In an act of arrogance, Gilles kidnapped a clergyman during a quarrel over land. This was a fatal mistake. By attacking a man of the church, he had made an enemy of the powerful Bishop of Nantes. The bishop launched an official investigation, and suddenly the dam of fear and silence broke. Witnesses, mostly Gilles' own former servants and accomplices, were brought forward. Under interrogation, they confessed everything, revealing the full, sickening scale of the atrocities committed at Tifolges and his other estates. The testimonies were so shocking, so monstrous, that the court scribes were said to have stopped writing, their hands trembling too much to continue. They painted a picture of a man utterly consumed by his depravity, a man who killed for sport, for sexual gratification, and for the components of his dark rituals. The trial of Gilles de Rais in 1440 was a medieval spectacle. He was tried by both ecclesiastical and civil courts charged with heresy, sodomy, and the murder of more than 140 children, though the true number is believed to be much higher, perhaps reaching into the hundreds. At first, he was arrogant and defiant, insulting the judges and refusing to recognize their authority. But faced with the threat of torture and the overwhelming weight of the evidence against him, his composure shattered. He broke down and gave a full, tearful confession, describing his crimes in horrifying detail. He begged for God's forgiveness and seemed to find a strange sense of peace in his unburdening. The verdict was a foregone conclusion. On October 26, 1440, Gilles de Rais, hero of France, was hanged and his body partially burned at the stake. His story became a cautionary tale, a legend whispered by firesides for centuries. Many scholars believe that his horrific crimes were the historical basis for the fairy tale of Bluebeard, the wealthy, monstrous nobleman who murders his wives and keeps their bodies in a hidden room. The case of Gilles de Rais presented medieval society with a terrifying conundrum. How could a man who had been touched by grace, who had fought alongside a saint, fall so far into damnation? His life was a stark illustration of the duality of human nature, the capacity for both heroic sacrifice and monstrous evil within a single soul. He was not a demon or a werewolf, he was a man, which made his crimes all the more terrifying. He demonstrated that the most fearsome monsters are not those that crawl from the pits of hell, but those that are created in the crucible of human experience, in the trauma of war, the arrogance of power, and the silent, secret chambers of the heart. His story marks a crucial point in our journey through the history of darkness. It shows us a killer whose motives were not political like Locusta's, nor compulsive like the Roman phantoms, but deeply, terrifyingly personal and psychological. His evil was a perversion of power, a grotesque indulgence born of wealth and impunity. But what if the killer was not a man driven by dark spiritual urges, but a woman, a noble woman of even higher rank, driven by something as terrifyingly mundane as vanity? From the castles of France, the shadow of aristocratic evil moves east, across the heart of Europe, to the Carpathian mountains of Hungary, and to a name that would become even more synonymous with sadistic cruelty. Some monsters are born of madness, others are born of privilege, and some are born from the terrifying belief that the lives of lesser people are worth nothing more than the fleeting pleasure they can provide. In the late 16th and early 17th centuries, in the remote and rugged landscape of the Kingdom of Hungary, lived a woman whose name would become a byword for aristocratic cruelty and sadistic terror, Countess Elizabeth Bathory. Descended from one of the most powerful and wealthy Protestant families in the region, she was intelligent, well-educated, and married into another immensely powerful clan. By all accounts, she was the mistress of a vast domain, a woman of immense authority. But within the walls of her many castles, most infamously the isolated Chaktic castle, a different reality was unfolding, a reality of systemic torture and murder on an industrial scale. The stories that would eventually emerge from Chaktic were so gruesome, they would form the bedrock of the modern vampire legend, painting a portrait of a woman who was not just a killer, but a fiend who bathed in the blood of her victims to preserve her own youth. For decades, rumors circulated about the fate of the young servant girls who went to work for the countess and were never seen again. Locals spoke of horrific screams echoing from the castle at night, of disfigured bodies secretly buried in the dark. But Elizabeth Bathory was untouchable. Her family connections, including a cousin who was the Prime Minister of Hungary, and her late husband's heroic status as a warrior against the Ottoman Turks, shielded her from any serious scrutiny. She operated with a chilling sense of impunity, believing herself to be above the law of both God and man. Her victims were primarily local peasant girls, lured to the castle by the promise of well-paid work as chambermaids. Once inside, they were trapped. According to the later testimonies of survivors and accomplices, the girls were subjected to unimaginable torments. They were beaten, burned, mutilated, bitten, starved, and left to freeze to death in the snow. Bathory, often assisted by a small circle of loyal servants, was said to have taken a direct, hands-on role in these sadistic acts, deriving a perverse pleasure from the suffering of her captives. Power does not corrupt, it simply reveals what was already there. The most enduring and sensational aspect of her legend is the claim that she bathed in the blood of virgins to retain her youthful beauty. While this detail is the cornerstone of her vampire myth, it is notably absent from the initial witness testimonies and may have been a later embellishment to sensationalize the case. The historical reality, however, is no less horrifying. The murders were not motivated by a supernatural quest for immortality, but by pure, unadulterated sadism. The catalyst for her downfall came when she began to target the daughters of the lesser nobility, girls sent to her court to learn etiquette. Unlike the peasant girls, these victims had families with the influence to demand an investigation. The whispers finally reached the ears of King Matthias II, who ordered György Thurzó, the Palatine of Hungary, to look into the matter. Thurzó's investigation was swift and decisive. On December 30th, 1610, he and his soldiers conducted a surprise raid on Chaktic Castle. The scene they discovered was a house of horrors. They reportedly found one girl dead, another dying, and others imprisoned, bearing the marks of horrific torture. The evidence was undeniable. Bathory's accomplices were immediately arrested and put on trial. Their testimony, extracted under torture, painted a sickeningly detailed picture of the Countess's crimes. They confessed to helping her murder dozens, if not hundreds, of girls over many years. The numbers cited by witnesses ranged from 30 to over 650, a figure written in what was claimed to be one of Bathory's own private diaries. Based on this evidence, her four main collaborators were executed in brutal fashion. But Elizabeth Bathory herself was never brought to a public trial. To try and execute a member of such a powerful and noble family would have created a massive scandal, disgracing the aristocracy and destabilizing the region. A political solution was found. To avoid a public spectacle, the Blood Countess was sentenced to a unique and terrible punishment. She was to be walled up within a set of rooms in her own Chaktic castle. The windows and doors were bricked over, leaving only a small opening for food and water to be passed through. She remained in this self-made tomb for 4 years, until she was found dead in August of 1614. A solitary end for a monster whose crimes were anything but. The story of Elizabeth Bathory has since been shrouded in myth and folklore. She has become the archetypal female vampire, a symbol of predatory female sexuality and aristocratic decadence. But if we strip away the supernatural legends, the historical core of the story reveals something just as terrifying: a serial killer operating with near-total impunity due to her social status. Like Gilles de Rais, she was a predator protected by her power. Her case demonstrates how the structures of a rigid, hierarchical society can enable and conceal monstrous behavior. The lives of the common people were deemed expendable, their suffering ignored, until the killer made the mistake of crossing a social boundary and preying on her own class. Her evil was personal, sadistic, and contained within the walls of her domain. But what of an evil that is not personal, but institutional? An evil that is not the secret shame of an individual, but the proud, sacred duty of an entire organization. From the solitary predator of the European aristocracy, our journey takes us to the hot, dusty plains of India, where for centuries, murder was not a sin to be hidden, but a holy sacrament to be performed in the name of a goddess. So, who is the greater monster? The fallen hero, Gilles de Rais, who betrayed every ideal he fought for, a man torn between God and his own demons. Or the blood countess Elizabeth Bathory, who never pretended to be anything other than the predator she was, a woman for whom cruelty was simply an expression of her power. Let us know who you find more chilling in the comments below. Is it the fallen angel or the born demon? The abyss is listening, and your choice tells a story about the nature of evil itself. For centuries, travelers crossing the vast landscapes of the Indian subcontinent whispered tales of a hidden menace. Caravans of merchants, groups of pilgrims and solitary wayfarers would simply vanish, disappearing from the roads as if swallowed by the earth itself. There were no signs of struggle, no witnesses, no bodies ever found. These disappearances were often blamed on bandits or wild animals, but the truth was far more organized, far more widespread, and infinitely more bizarre. The culprits were members of a secret society, a hereditary cult of ritual assassins who had been practicing their deadly trade for over 600 years. They were known as the Thuggee. To the outside world, they were unremarkable. They were farmers, merchants, soldiers, and artisans living ordinary lives in their villages. But this was a carefully constructed facade. In reality, they belonged to a highly disciplined and deeply religious fraternity dedicated to the goddess Kali, the Hindu deity of destruction and renewal. They believed that they were her chosen instruments and that every life they took was a sacred offering to her. This was not murder for profit, though they did take the belongings of their victims. It was murder as a holy vocation. The Thuggee operated with a chillingly consistent and effective methodology. A group of thugs, often disguised as friendly travelers, would integrate themselves with a target caravan. They were masters of deception, spending days or even weeks winning the trust of their future victims, sharing meals, stories, and the hardships of the road. They would learn everything about them, their destination, the value of the goods they carried, and the number of guards they had. Once they had gained their complete confidence and reached a secluded spot, they would strike. At a prearranged signal from the group's leader, often a coded phrase like, "Bring the tobacco," the thugs would act in perfect unison. Each assassin had a designated target. Their weapon was not a blade, which would spill sacred blood, but a rumal, a yellow silk scarf with a coin tied into one end. In a single, swift motion, they would loop the scarf around the victim's neck from behind, using the coin to apply pressure, while a second thug pulled the victim's legs out from under them. Death was quick, silent, and efficient. The entire attack was over in moments. After the killing, they would perform a ritual feast, consecrate the ground, and then meticulously bury the bodies, ensuring no trace of their crime was ever found. The scale of the Thuggee operation is staggering and almost incomprehensible. It was a subculture of murder passed down from father to son for generations. Boys were initiated into the cult at a young age, first serving as lookouts, then learning how to bury the bodies, and finally being taught the sacred art of strangulation. They had their own secret language, Ramessi, and a complex system of signs and omens that dictated when and where they should strike. They believed that Kali protected them, and that as long as they followed her rituals, they would never be caught. For centuries, this belief held true. Local rulers were either unaware of the cult's existence or were paid off to look the other way. The Thuggee were a secret cancer spreading across the arteries of India, an invisible empire of death. Conservative estimates suggest they may have killed 500,000 people, while some historians, extrapolating from British records, place the number as high as 2 million, making them arguably the most prolific serial killers in human history. They were not a gang. They were a civilization built on murder. The end of the Thuggee came with the expansion of the British Empire in India. The British, with their obsession for law, order, and the safe passage of commercial goods, could not tolerate the constant disruption and disappearance of people and property. In the 1830s, the Governor-General of India, Lord William Bentinck, decided to eradicate the cult once and for all. He appointed a charismatic and determined officer named Captain William Sleeman to head the newly formed Thuggee and Dacoity Department. Sleeman approached the task not as a simple policing action, but as a full-scale intelligence war. He understood that he was not fighting common criminals, but a deeply ingrained cultural and religious phenomenon. He set up a network of spies and informers, mapping out the cult's family trees, operational areas, and secret codes. His greatest breakthrough came when he offered captured thugs a deal: confess, name your accomplices, and become an approver, a state's witness, and your life will be spared. Faced with the gallows, hundreds of thugs broke their code of silence. The information provided by these approvers was a tidal wave of horror. For the first time, the British understood the true nature and scale of the cult they were fighting. Sleeman and his men used this intelligence to launch a massive crackdown. Over the next decade, more than 3,000 thugs were captured. Over 400 were sent to the gallows, and thousands more were imprisoned for life or exiled. Sleeman's campaign was methodical and ruthless. He dismantled the cult's entire infrastructure, breaking the chain of hereditary knowledge that had sustained it for centuries. By the 1870s, the Thuggee had been effectively wiped out. The British campaign was hailed as a great triumph of civilization over barbarism, a victory for rational law over superstitious savagery. It was, in essence, one of the first successful large-scale counter-terrorism operations in history. The story of the Thuggee presents a unique and unsettling portrait of serial murder. It shows us a world where killing was not an aberration, but a norm, not a psychological sickness, but a sacred tradition. These men were not deranged individuals hiding in the shadows. They were pillars of their communities, loving fathers and husbands who just happened to practice ritual murder as a profession. The British imposed their rational, empirical order on the superstitious savagery of the Thuggee. They fought a secret society with intelligence networks and systematic prosecution, believing they were bringing the light of reason to a dark and violent land. But back in Europe, the heartland of this supposed rationality, a different kind of darkness festered. It was a darkness born not of ancient cults, but of deep-seated folk terrors and religious hysteria. In the small, God-fearing towns of 16th century Germany, when unexplained brutality struck, the rational mind was often the first casualty. People did not look for a man with a motive, they looked for a monster from their darkest nightmares. Our journey now takes us from the organized, sacred evil of the East back to the heart of Europe, where a series of horrific crimes would convince an entire community that they were not being hunted by a man, but by a creature of pure, demonic evil, a werewolf. When a child's mutilated body was found in the fields near the small town of Bedburg, Germany, in the late 16th century, the terrified townsfolk did not think to look for a human culprit. The sheer savagery of the attack, the way the victim had been torn apart, pointed to something else entirely. It was the work of a beast, a wolf. But as more people, men, women, and children, were found slaughtered in the surrounding countryside over a period of 25 years, a more terrifying suspicion took root. This was no ordinary wolf. The attacks were too cunning, too audacious. The creature seemed to kill not just for hunger, but for sport, and it was able to elude every trap and hunting party sent after it. The people of Bedburg became convinced they were being stalked by a werewolf, a man who had made a pact with the devil to transform into a ravenous beast. Panic and religious hysteria gripped the region. The fear was a palpable thing, a suffocating fog that settled over the town, making every shadow seem menacing and every howl of the wind sound like a predator's cry. The hunt for the werewolf of Bedburg was relentless. Armed bands of peasants and local authorities scoured the forests, desperate to find the monster that was terrorizing their community. In 1589, their hunt seemingly came to an end. A group of hunters claimed to have cornered a large, powerful wolf. As they closed in with their dogs, they said the creature magically transformed before their very eyes into a man, a local farmer named Peter Stump. Stump was a wealthy and well-respected member of the community, a widower who lived with his 2 children. His arrest sent shockwaves through the town. This was not some outsider or vagrant. This was one of their own. The man they had known for years, they now believed, was the beast that had been preying on them. Under brutal torture on the rack, Peter Stump confessed to everything his accusers wanted to hear, and more. His confession, later printed and distributed in lurid pamphlets across Germany and England, is one of the most sensational documents of the era. Stump claimed that since the age of 12, he had been a practitioner of black magic. He said the devil had appeared to him and given him a magical belt made of wolfskin. Whenever he wore it, he transformed into the likeness of a greedy, devouring wolf, strong and mighty, with eyes great and large, which in the night sparkled like brands of fire, a mouth great and wide, with most sharp and cruel teeth, a huge body, and mighty paws. In this form he confessed to the savage murders of 13 children and 2 pregnant women, whose fetuses he allegedly tore from their wombs and ate. He admitted to being a cannibal, feasting on the raw flesh of his victims. He also confessed to incest with his daughter and to killing his own son so he could eat his brains. He even claimed to have killed and devoured livestock throughout the region. His confession was a perfect storm of every fear that haunted the medieval mind: witchcraft, Satanism, cannibalism, incest, and lycanthropy. It confirmed everything the terrified populace already believed. They had not just caught a murderer, they had captured a servant of Satan himself. Was Peter Stump truly a werewolf? Or was he a serial killer whose horrific but all too human crimes were filtered through the lens of a superstitious age? Historians today believe that Stump was almost certainly a real serial killer, and his confession, though extracted under torture and likely embellished, probably contained a kernel of truth about the murders he committed. The supernatural elements, the magic belt, the transformation, were a product of the collective hysteria and the leading questions of his interrogators. In an age that believed in devils and witches, a werewolf was a more comforting explanation than the alternative, that a normal man, a neighbor, could be capable of such monstrous deeds without any supernatural intervention. The concept of a psychopathic personality did not exist. The only available framework to understand such profound evil was a religious one. Stump was not sick, he was demonic. The community's terror, their need for a monstrous explanation, was a powerful force that shaped the narrative of the crime itself. The punishment devised for Peter Stump was designed to be as monstrous as his alleged crimes. It was a piece of brutal theater meant to cleanse the community and serve as a terrifying warning to others who might consort with the devil. On October 31st, 1589, he was led to the place of execution. There he was tied to a wheel. Chunks of his flesh were torn from his body with red-hot pincers. Then his arms and legs were systematically broken with the back of an axe head to prevent him from returning from the grave. Finally, while still alive, he was beheaded. His daughter and his mistress, convicted as accomplices, were burned at the stake on the same day. As a final gruesome warning, Stump's head was mounted on a pole, which was attached to the very wheel used in his torture, surrounded by 16 wooden stakes representing his victims. The magic wolf belt was never found. The case of the werewolf of Bedburg is a chilling example of how real-world horror can fuel and merge with folklore. It demonstrates a society grappling with a phenomenon it cannot comprehend, forcing the ugly reality of human evil into the familiar shape of a monster from a dark fairy tale. The public, ritualistic execution of Peter Stump was a form of brutal social control, a way for the community to reclaim a sense of order from the chaos he had unleashed. It was a spectacle of justice, where the killer himself became the victim of the collective terror he had created. This stark public brutality stands in sharp contrast to a different kind of killing culture, one where the murderer was not a reviled outcast but a member of the ruling elite, and where murder was not a crime to be punished by the state but a right to be exercised by it. From the superstitious forests of Germany, we travel to the sophisticated, rigidly structured society of feudal Japan. Here, a killer did not need a magic belt to feel powerful, nor did he need to hide in the shadows. He simply needed a sharp sword and the legal right to use it, a right that would be twisted into a license for a grim and terrifying phenomenon known as crossroads killing. In the bustling, lantern-lit streets of Edo, the city that would one day become Tokyo, a different kind of fear stalked the night. This was not the fear of a supernatural beast or a madman driven by demonic possession. It was the fear of a swift, silent, and chillingly human predator. It was the fear of the samurai. During the long, peaceful centuries of the Tokugawa shogunate, the samurai class, a warrior caste with no wars to fight, found itself in a paradoxical position. They were an elite class defined by their martial prowess, yet forbidden from practicing it. They were expected to uphold Bushido, a strict code of honor, loyalty, and self-discipline. But for some, this enforced idleness and the immense social power they held became a toxic combination. It gave rise to a grim practice known as tsujigiri, which translates literally to crossroads cutting. In its most terrifying form, it meant that a samurai could test the quality of a new sword or practice a new fighting move on a random, defenseless commoner who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. A life for a sword's edge. Imagine walking home at night through the darkened, narrow streets. A figure emerges from the shadows, his rank identifiable by the two swords tucked into his belt. There is no argument, no robbery. There is only the whisper of steel being drawn from its scabbard, a single, blindingly fast cut, and then nothing. The killer would not break stride, melting back into the darkness as his victim collapsed to the ground. These were not duels, they were assassinations. The victims were often peasants, merchants, or artisans, anyone from the lower classes who, by law, had no right to defend themselves against a samurai. To even raise a hand to a member of the warrior class was an offense punishable by death. This legal and social impunity created a hunting ground in the heart of Japan's largest cities. The killer of the crossroads was a ghost. He could be any one of the thousands of samurai who walked the city streets. He could be a proud warrior testing his new katana, a drunken ronin taking out his frustrations, or a cold-blooded killer simply satisfying a dark urge. The motives were as varied as the men who committed the acts. The shogunate, the military government of Japan, officially condemned tsujigiri. It was seen as a dishonorable act that brought shame upon the samurai class and a threat to public order. Edicts were issued, and the practice was made a capital offense. Yet it persisted. The investigation of these killings was incredibly difficult. In a society where a samurai had the legal right of kirisute gomen, the right to cut down and leave, meaning he could strike down a commoner for a perceived insult, the line between a legally sanctioned killing and a random murder was perilously thin. A killer, if caught, could simply invent an insult to justify his actions. Furthermore, the victims were often from the lowest rungs of society, their deaths considered insignificant by the authorities. The perfect strike, a clean cut that killed in a single motion, was a point of pride for a swordsman. For the tsujigiri killer, a human body was merely a target, a practiced dummy to perfect his technique. This cold aesthetic of death, this focus on the perfection of the act rather than its human consequence, is a chilling precursor to the mindset of many modern serial killers who focus on their signature. One of the most infamous cases of tsujigiri was that of the killer of 100 men, a samurai named Sadasuke, who went on a murderous rampage in Edo. His goal, born of a twisted sense of pride and madness, was to kill 100 people to prove his martial superiority. He stalked the city at night, cutting down anyone he came across, His spree created a wave of terror, forcing the authorities to act. He was eventually hunted down and killed, but his story became a dark legend, a testament to how the samurai's code of honor could be perverted into a justification for mass murder. These killers were a symptom of a warrior class in decay, men whose purpose had been stripped away, leaving only their pride and their swords. They turned their skills, honed for the battlefield, inward upon their own society. They were the ultimate predators in their social ecosystem, armed, trained, and protected by a system that placed their honor above a commoner's life. What is the difference between a warrior and a murderer? Sometimes it is only the context of their actions. The phenomenon of tsujigiri offers a stark look at how power and social structure can create a unique brand of serial killer. These were not men driven by occult beliefs like Gilles de Rais, or by sadistic vanity like Elizabeth Bathory. They were products of a rigid honor culture, men for whom killing was an extension of their identity. The samurai's sword was a symbol of his soul. For the tsujigiri, it became a tool for his soullessness. The terror they created was not one of chaos, but of a terrifying, arbitrary order, an order where any commoner's life could be extinguished in an instant at the whim of a social superior. This cold, blade-thin line between honor and murder, between a warrior and a predator, was a uniquely Japanese manifestation of a universal darkness. But as the age of swords and shoguns began to wane, a new world was being born across the ocean. A world without ancient codes or rigid hierarchies. A raw, untamed continent where the law was scarce, and a new kind of monster, bred from chaos itself, was about to make its bloody debut. From the ordered brutality of feudal Japan, we crossed the Pacific to the lawless frontier of late 18th century America. A samurai tests his new blade on a defenseless peasant. A ronin cuts down a merchant in a dark alley to prove his skill. Is this a twisted display of martial prowess, an aberration of a noble warrior tradition? Or is it simply murder, stripped of all its cultural justifications? We ask you, where does honor end and brutality begin? Let us know if you believe this is a warped code of a warrior society or pure, unadulterated chaos disguised as tradition. Your answer defines the line between a soldier and a killer. In the vast, untamed wilderness of the American frontier in the late 1700s, civilization was a fragile concept. Beyond the coastal cities, it was a land of dense forests, remote settlements, and lawlessness. This was the landscape that gave birth to the United States of America, and it was also the crucible for the nation's first documented serial killers. They were not sophisticated aristocrats or members of a secret cult. They were brutal, primal creatures of the wilderness, two brothers whose campaign of terror was so savage, so devoid of any understandable motive, that it shocked even the hardened settlers of the frontier. They were Micaiah and Wiley Harp, known to history as Big and Little Harp. They were not bandits who killed for profit. They were monsters who killed for pleasure. Their story is the bloody genesis of a uniquely American nightmare, the roving, remorseless killer, a product of a vast and violent land. Born in what is now North Carolina, the Harp brothers were fiercely loyal to the British Crown during the Revolutionary War. They were not soldiers in a regular army, but part of brutal Tory gangs that waged a vicious guerrilla war against patriot settlers, committing acts of arson, torture, and murder. The war gave them a license for their inherent cruelty, but when the war ended, their violence did not. Cast out and despised as traitors, they drifted west into the wild lands of Kentucky and Tennessee, taking with them a small group of women, including their so-called wives, whom they treated as slaves. It was here, on the edge of civilization, that they began their true reign of terror, around 1797. Their bloody trail is a litany of motiveless, opportunistic murders. They killed men, women, and children with indiscriminate ferocity. A traveler on the road, a family in a remote cabin, anyone who had the misfortune of crossing their path was a potential victim. Their methods were as savage as their motives were opaque. They used knives, tomahawks, and rifles, but they also developed a gruesome signature. They would often disembowel their victims, fill the abdominal cavity with rocks, and sink the body in a river or creek. This practice earned them the chilling nickname, the Harps, the River Pirates, and it served the practical purpose of disposing of the evidence. But its sheer brutality also suggests a deep-seated pathological rage. One of their most infamous acts was the murder of their own infant child. The story goes that Big Harp, annoyed by the baby's crying, seized the child from its mother and smashed its head against a tree. This act of casual, familial cruelty horrified even their own small band and cemented their reputation as inhuman monsters. They were the embodiment of chaos in a land struggling to establish order. They were not just outlaws, they were a force of nature, a plague of violence sweeping through the frontier. The settlers of the frontier were a tough, self-reliant people, accustomed to hardship and danger. But the Harps were different from the Native American warriors or common outlaws they were used to. The Harps killed without reason, with a glee that was terrifying. Their reputation spread, and a posse was formed to hunt them down. Led by a determined settler named Moses Stigall, whose own wife and child had been murdered by the brothers, the posse cornered the Harps in 1799. Little Harp managed to escape, but Big Harp was shot and captured. What happened next was not an act of legal justice, but of frontier vengeance. As Big Harp lay dying, Moses Stigall slowly and deliberately cut off his head with a butcher knife. They then placed the head in the fork of a tree at a crossroads as a grim warning to any other outlaws. The location is still known today as Harp's Head, Kentucky. Little Harp was captured a few years later and met a similar fate, his head also displayed on a pike. The story of the Harp brothers is a foundational myth in the dark folklore of America. They represent the savage impulse that lies just beneath the surface of civilization, the darkness that can flourish in a lawless land. They were not complex psychological studies like Gilles de Rais. They were not professionals like Locusta. They were simply purely evil. They were America's first demons, a terrifying preview of the kind of random, nihilistic violence that would come to haunt the nation in the centuries to follow. They demonstrated that a new country, forged in revolution and dedicated to liberty, could also breed its own unique and terrifying monsters. Their brutal, straightforward savagery, born of the wild and untamed frontier, stands in stark contrast to the creeping, psychological terrors that were beginning to fester in the old, supposedly civilized cities of Europe. While America was dealing with its primal monsters in the open wilderness, another kind of predator was evolving in the claustrophobic, gaslit darkness of the world's largest metropolis. From the raw, bloody wilderness of the American frontier, we travel back across the Atlantic to a city that considered itself the heart of the civilized world, London. As the 18th century bled into the 19th, London was a city of stark contrasts, of immense wealth and crushing poverty, of scientific progress and deep-seated superstition. It was a city teeming with millions, a labyrinth of grand squares and dark, forgotten alleys. And it was in this sprawling, foggy metropolis that a new kind of terror began to take shape. It was a terror that was not about savage murder, but about psychological warfare, a terror born of urban anonymity and the burgeoning power of the press. Long before Jack the Ripper would make the city his hunting ground, London was stalked by two enigmatic figures who blurred the line between real criminal and urban legend, the London Monster and the mysterious, spring-heeled Jack. They were the city's phantom tormentors, harbingers of a modern form of serial crime where fear itself was the ultimate weapon. The terror began in 1788. Women walking through the streets of London began to report being attacked by a mysterious man. He would approach them, often uttering obscenities, and then, with a knife or a pin hidden in a bouquet of fake flowers, he would stab or slash them, specifically targeting their buttocks and thighs. He would then melt back into the crowd, leaving his victims shocked, wounded, and humiliated. The attacks were not fatal, but they were deeply unsettling. The assailant was dubbed the London Monster, and his bizarre sexually charged crimes created a wave of panic and hysteria. Newspapers, still a relatively new force in society, seized upon the story, publishing sensationalized accounts that fanned the flames of public fear. Women became afraid to walk the streets alone. Men formed armed vigilante groups to patrol the city. The monster was described as a tall, imposing man, but eyewitness accounts were contradictory and unreliable. He was everywhere and nowhere at once, a phantom created as much by public anxiety as by his own actions. The panic reached such a fever pitch that the authorities were under immense pressure to make an arrest. The public demanded a monster, and so a monster was provided. In 1790, a young artificial flower maker named Rynwick Williams was accused of being the London Monster. The case against him was flimsy based on the questionable identification of a single victim, but the public needed a scapegoat. Williams was put on trial, and despite his protestations of innocence, he was convicted not of the stabbings, but of a lesser charge of intent to injure. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison. After his arrest, the attacks ceased. But was Williams truly the London Monster? Or was he an innocent man sacrificed to quell a city's hysteria? Many historians now believe the monster may not have been a single individual at all, but a collection of unrelated attacks and copycat crimes, magnified by the press into the work of a single, malevolent entity. The London Monster case is a crucial turning point. It represents one of the first media-driven moral panics, a preview of how the modern serial killer's mythology would be co-created by the criminal and the culture that fears him. Almost half a century later, a new and even more bizarre phantom would terrorize London. This was the legend of Spring-Heeled Jack. The first sightings were reported in 1837. A mysterious figure was said to be leaping over high walls and gates with astonishing agility, costing travelers. He was described as having a terrifying demonic appearance with glowing eyes and claws for hands. Some reports claimed he could breathe blue and white flames from his mouth. Unlike the London Monster, Spring-Heeled Jack's attacks were more theatrical than physically harmful. He seemed to delight in causing terror for its own sake. He would ambush women, tearing at their clothes with his claws before bounding away over a 10-foot wall. He reportedly jumped in front of a mail coach, causing it to crash. The stories spread like wildfire from the suburbs to the city centre. Was he a ghost, a demon, a prankster with an ingenious acrobatic device, or something more sinister? The legend of Spring-Heeled Jack would endure for decades, with sightings reported across the United Kingdom well into the early 1900s. He became a fixture of Victorian folklore, a boogeyman who haunted the industrial age. Like the London Monster, it is almost certain that Spring-Heeled Jack was not a single entity. He was likely a composite of several pranksters, muggers, and genuine eccentrics whose deeds were woven together by rumor and the press into the legend of a single, supernatural being. But the fear he inspired was very real. He represented the anxieties of a rapidly changing world. In the smog-choked, anonymous landscape of the industrial city, anyone could be a monster. The old familiar demons of the forest and the village had been replaced by a new, urban fiend who could strike from the shadows of a factory or the fog of a gaslit street. These two phenomena, the London Monster and Spring-Heeled Jack, are more than just curious footnotes in the history of crime. They are the crucial link between the ancient monsters and the modern serial killer. They show a society struggling to name a new kind of evil, one that thrived on the anonymity of the modern city. They were the dress rehearsal. They tilled the soil of the public imagination, planting the seeds of fear and paranoia that would come to full, bloody fruition in the autumn of 1888, when a true artist of terror would step onto the stage of Whitechapel and give the monster a new and eternal name, Jack the Ripper. The phantoms had prepared the world for a new kind of predator, one that would soon require a new kind of science to even begin to understand. The phantoms of Victorian London, the London Monster, Spring-Heeled Jack, were creatures of myth as much as reality. They were reflections of a society's anxieties, shapeless horrors born in the fog of the industrial city. But this era of speculation was drawing to a close. The Age of Reason, which had begun centuries earlier, was finally turning its methodical gaze upon the darkest corners of the human mind. The world was on the cusp of a revolution, not of industry or politics, but of understanding. Humanity was about to embark on a quest to dissect the soul of the monster, to trade superstition for science, and to replace the concept of the demon with the diagnosis of the deviant. This final leg of our journey takes us to the birth of criminology, the moment when we stopped hunting monsters with torches and pitchforks and started hunting them with fingerprints, forensic medicine, and the radical, terrifying new science of psychology. We are witnessing the end of the ancient monster and the birth of the modern one. In the closing decades of the 19th century, as Jack the Ripper was making headlines in London, other, less famous, but equally brutal killers were carving their own bloody paths across continental Europe. In France, there was Joseph Vacher, the French Ripper, a discharged soldier who roamed the countryside, murdering and mutilating at least 11 people, mostly shepherds and shepherdesses. In Germany, there was Karl Denker, the cannibal of Zimbicha, who appeared to be a quiet, well-liked organist, but was discovered to have been murdering and eating vagrants for years, even selling their flesh at the local market as pork. These killers, and others like them, presented a profound challenge to the legal and medical establishments of the time. They were not killing for profit, politics, or passion in the traditional sense. Their violence was compulsive, repetitive, and seemingly meaningless. The old explanations, demonic possession, innate wickedness, were no longer sufficient for a world that prided itself on scientific progress. A new language was needed to describe this type of criminal. The first attempts to create this new language came from the emerging field of psychiatry. In Italy, a physician named Cesare Lombroso pioneered a controversial but influential theory, the born criminal. Lombroso argued that criminality was a biological throwback, an atavistic trait that could be identified by certain physical characteristics or stigmata, things like sloping foreheads, large jaws, and asymmetrical faces. He believed that killers like Vacher were not men who had chosen evil, but evolutionary degenerates, savages living in a civilized world. While his theories were crude and have since been largely discredited as scientific racism, they represented a monumental shift in thinking. For the first time, the focus moved from the sin to the sinner, from the crime to the criminal. Lombroso was attempting to create a taxonomy of evil, to classify the human predator as a biologist would classify a new species of insect. He was trying to make the monster knowable. This scientific impulse transformed the art of investigation. In Argentina, a police officer named Juan Vucetich developed the first workable system for classifying fingerprints, a revolutionary tool that could link a suspect to a crime scene with unprecedented certainty. In France, Alphonse Bertillon created anthropometry, a system of identifying criminals based on precise body measurements. At the same time, forensic medicine was making great leaps forward, allowing investigators to analyze blood, tissue, and trace evidence to reconstruct the story of a crime. The invisible killer, the phantom who could melt back into the crowd, was suddenly becoming visible. The tools of science were dragging him out of the shadows and into the harsh light of the laboratory. The hunt for the monster was no longer a matter of guesswork and superstition, it was becoming a process of methodical, rational deduction. The age of the detective was dawning, and with it, the age of the forensic scientist. With these new scientific tools came a new way of looking at the past. The historical monsters we have journeyed with, Gilles de Rais, Elizabeth Bathory, were re-examined through this new lens. Were they simply evil aristocrats, or could their behavior be explained in medical or psychological terms? Gilles de Rais, once seen as a Satanist who made a pact with the devil, was now analyzed as a possible case of severe post-traumatic stress disorder from his time at war, combined with a psychopathic personality. Elizabeth Bathory's sadistic cruelty was reinterpreted not as a quest for eternal youth, but as a manifestation of narcissistic rage and sexual psychopathy. Peter Stump was no longer a werewolf but a rural serial killer whose community projected their folklore onto his crimes. The demons of the past were being exorcised by diagnosis. The supernatural was giving way to the psychological. The monster was being brought out of the realm of theology and into the clinic. We have traveled a long and bloody road, from the dark alleys of ancient Rome to the gaslit streets of Victorian London, from the castles of mad nobles to the sacred groves of assassin cults. We have seen how the face of the monster has changed with the ages, mirroring the fears and obsessions of each era. He has been a demon, a werewolf, a sinner, a soldier, a nobleman, and a phantom. And now, at the dawn of the 20th century, he has been given his final name, a scientific specimen, a psychological case study. We have created a vast and complex system to identify, classify, and understand him. We have mapped his mind and catalogued his methods. But in all our searching, in all our science, have we truly solved the riddle of his existence? Or have we just become more sophisticated in how we describe the darkness that has walked beside us since the beginning of time? We have journeyed from a world that explained inexplicable evil with werewolves and demons to one that uses psychological profiles and DNA analysis. This knowledge, this rational framework, has undoubtedly made us more effective at catching the monsters. But has it truly made us safer from them? We have given the beasts that live among us scientific names, cataloguing their compulsions and charting their pathologies. But has a monster once named ceased to be a monster? Now, a final question for you. What do you find more frightening? The ancient evil which was seen as a punishment from the gods or a tear in the fabric of the cosmos? Or modern brutality which, we are often told, always has a rational, scientific, or psychological explanation? Write your answer in the comments. It is a vital question, for in the answer lies the truth about the world we have built and the nature of the shadows that still linger within it.